With the release of The Flash finally coming to theaters this week, it's time to dive in and re-rank the entire DC Universe films, all the way from Man of Steel now to The Flash. This is going to be a fun ranking at that. I've rewatched a lot of these films. My rankings kind of changed over time. And with that said, I can't wait to get your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. So make sure to leave your thoughts down there because rankings are very subjective. What you have as your number one might be completely different as mine. And specifically when it comes down to this universe, it seems it is very mixed with what everyone's thoughts are. So with that said, let's jump in to this ranking. Coming down on my number 14 is the original Justice League cut that had premiered in theaters. Now, arguably, this isn't that bad of a movie. It's surface level entertainment that you can throw on and enjoy for what it is. What makes this movie crap is when you do watch Zack Snyder's cut, you see all the changes that just are baffling. Then you start to hear a little bit more about the studio and how they interfered completely within this film, and it just makes you sick to your stomach. This is a very toxic movie that for me should just be washed away and forgotten. Like I mentioned, there are entertaining bits to it because primarily those are Zack Snyder. Everything else that was added, mixed in, and specifically everything within the third act is an absolute mess, and this again is one of the worst comic book films of all time. I think if we look at just background stories and histories on set, this might be one of the most toxic things that has ever come out of Hollywood. Now, my number 13 is the original Suicide Squad, and when this trailer premiered, I was like, this is one of my most anticipated films of all time. I will always say that the trailers for this film are some of the best, and then when you watch the movie, it is a mess. Now, there are definitely entertaining moments to it, and I think the characters and the actors themselves do a good job in the role. I like David Ayer's aesthetic and what he was trying to fit in here for the Suicide Squad. The problem is all of that doesn't really work for a story that is completely meddled, butchered, and destroyed by the studio, as well as they only gave David Ayer like a month or so to write the script. For people who don't know, scripts typically take way longer than the amount of time they gave David Ayer, and in here, this film just deserves a lot more. I know a lot of people want them to release the Ayer cut. I'll be honest, I don't know how much better it could possibly be. Maybe it'd be semi-better, but this film has a lacking villain, lacking enemies, a lacking story that has really much no substance to it except an entertaining value with Suicide Squad characters, and that's it. A great introduction to Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. Deadshot is great. I love Will Smith in this role. Captain Boomerang's fun. El Diablo is one of the big standouts of this, but everything else is just very forgettable and very frustrating. Oh, my number 12, this one has shifted a lot of my ranking because when I initially saw it, I loved the movie. And honestly, I will still go as far as say that I love this movie as being an homage to old school comic book films such as the original Christopher Reeve Superman movie. And that is Wonder Woman 1984. The reason that this film goes so much lower on this list is because of two things: rewatchability and in general, just the structure of the movie, I guess. And on rewatches, you can definitely see how some of that is starting to fall apart. And for me, every film from here on out, I enjoy, to really love, to even like. And that's kind of the thing, is that I'm a major fan of the DCEU. There's no doubt about it. A lot of these movies I find to be good at the most, besides the bottom two. Those are garbage. But Wonder Woman 1984, I think, had an interesting premise. I liked the themes and thematics and the tone that Patty Jenkins was trying to go for. I think Gal Gadot gives an incredible performance in this. I think Pedro Pascal is awesome as Maxwell Lord. Cheetah's fine. I think Kristen Wiig was a good pick, but they just didn't do enough with that character. The reasons to bring back Steve Trevor really don't work when you start thinking about it in execution. But everything else I really like about the movie. I like the action. I like the humor. I like overall some of the concepts. I actually really even like the third act and how Wonder Woman takes down Maxwell Lord. Again, all these ideas work, but some of them will be different for every person. And I think this is a sequel that every time I watch it, I can enjoy it, but then you start to see some of the crumbling factors on everything else. And now my number 11 is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Now, this movie I actually really liked. I do not think it deserved any of the hate, primarily in the box office or from other critics, and I think this is a good, worthy follow-up from the original Shazam. It just runs into a lot of things that, one, it bombs because it got barely any marketing. Two, it felt like it was just kept getting pushed back and back and back. And 3, James Gunn's brand new DC universe being announced primarily right before this does not help this film all too much. And it sucks because I think this is, again, a worthy follow-up to the first one that expands the lore of Shazam once again, explores the monster side a little bit more of the DC universe that truly enough Wonder Woman should have been touching in a little bit harder on, but Shazam's been the one actually countering that. And I think Zachary Levi's good in the role. I think Asher Angel's great in the role. I wish he was in this a little bit more. I like that we get more of all of the family working together. The action set pieces are good. In general, though, walking away from this movie, I've just never had the urge to go back to it, to be honest. I find it to be underrated. I think more people should have gone out and see this, and specifically, I think it's, again, a good sequel to the original. I don't know, I just don't have that eagerness to go back and watch this one again. I had fun for what it was, though. At my number 10, we now have Aquaman. This is another one that I do feel kind of the same way that I felt with Shazam. While I do think this one stands out a little bit more in certain departments, primarily, I still think the best action scenes in some of almost all comic book films, but specifically the DC universe, are the best in Aquaman. The way that James Wan shoots the action in here is amazing. This is very much a film that feels like an epic fantasy under the sea. Lord of the Rings meets Star Wars in the ocean, and it's badass for that. The only problems with this movie is that it is too long. I think the villain is pretty weak. And as well, when you look at one other thing, I don't personally love like a lot of the supporting characters in this movie, and I do think Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson are primarily the best parts about this film when it comes down to performance-wise. This is one of those ones I just don't find myself wanting to go back and rewatch too often, but I do enjoy it every time I do catch it, or in general, the first time I watched it, I did love this movie, and I still love a lot of elements to it. I think this kind of goes down as one of those more underrated films in the DC universe that, while this movie did make $1 billion, I never really hear any people in my circles primarily talk about this film. It's cheesy, it's kooky, it's fun. That's about it. My number 9 is Birds of Prey, or The Fabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. A Harley Quinn solo spin-off movie coming off Suicide Squad seems like something that should have been in the running. Sadly, the film released right as COVID was hitting, and it didn't get a fair shot at the box office. I like that they took the R rating effect to this. I like the direction of this movie. I think the reason that Birds of Prey actually really works for me, though, is because I am a massive fan of Margot Robbie as the Harley Quinn character. I will go as far as say, if you did a Mount Rushmore of DC characters and DC actors who have played them, I would put Margot Robbie as number 2. I think she plays one of the most iconic roles and gives one of the most iconic performances in comic book history. Looking at this film as itself, I think it's kind of fun. There's a little bit of a Tarantino vibe specifically to how the story is actually told. The action is all kicked up a little bit of a notch, and it's all the street level gang territory. The Birds of Prey honestly could have had a little bit more development. This is definitely more of a Harley Quinn film itself, but it's hard to deny that you start to really fall in love with them by the end of it, and I was kind of hoping that we would get a sequel with more of these actors coming back to play the roles. Primarily Black Canary, who I thought was such a big standout besides Harley Quinn. Ewan McGregor as Black Mask was such a good standout to pick in for this role. Really liked seeing how Harley Quinn's progression had progressed throughout this entire movie. We get down to my number 8, which is another movie that I think deserved a little bit more love at the box office, and that is Black Adam. Now, Black Adam for me has a lot of mistakes to it all, whether it is some of the storytelling devices and how they reflect with the Black Adam character. I didn't love the twist that they tried doing with the small rock. That visual effects were just awful. I also think Sabak is one of the worst villains in the DC universe, just total trash and just there to be thrown around and beaten up by Black Adam himself. What this film does is it actually really built up a lot in the DC mythos, and primarily I think Dwayne Johnson is great in the role of Black Adam. This is a great movie that's a throwback to 2000 films. It's just a beat 'em up of heroes fighting one another, and I really dig that for what it is. Call this a guilty pleasure, may you, may not. I don't care. I just found this movie to be a ton of fun, and I liked the role that Dwayne Johnson got to build up with Black Adam. And I think the supporting cast with the Justice Society in here is a big standout as well. Cyclone has some great humor. I didn't love the Deadpool knockoff that they did with Adam. I could have used a little bit better instances with there. But Dr. Fate, Pierce Brosnan is such a major standout in here. And of course, as well as Hawkman, who I just thought was badass as hell. Everything that kind of led up to that grit, the action is top notch, and I think again this is just such a fun movie and a fun entry in the DC universe that again I will go as far to say is a great addition to the mythos. The way they build up, again, the Justice Society, the way that they build up the Shazam lore, there's so much goodness in here that actually does a lot for the DC universe itself. Now we get into my number 7, which is Wonder Woman. Now, I've never been one of the biggest fans of this movie. I know so many people out there that think this is the best one in the DCEU, and if you think that, that's completely fine, and I think that's awesome that you do. The reason that this film falters for me is, again, it falls into that category of I don't care to go back and rewatch this movie. I don't. I've only seen the movie maybe 4 or 5 times since its release, and since then, I don't really think too often about this movie besides the No Man Land sequence. Or in general, everything in the beginning, because I really like the upbringing of Diana and how she gets to there. It kind of gives me this Captain America vibe of how they handled the first Captain America movie, but I actually think Wonder Woman did it better. Primarily, this film peaks by the No Man Land action sequence, and I think that entire action sequence is just splendid. Diana Prince is, again, instantly iconic, and I think Gal Gadot fits this role so well, and if they really do replace her as Wonder Woman, that is going to make me sad, because I think she is phenomenal in the role. And this film just kind of finds itself heading towards forgettable territory once you get into the third act, primarily with the villain of Ares. I think Ares could have been built up a little bit better, and while I like the twist and the turn, it just becomes into a big CGI action fight. That is entertaining, but it didn't really fit for the rest of the film and what they were trying to structure out. And overall, this is a really solid movie and a really good one in the DCEU. At my number 6, we have the original Shazam, and I have a soft spot for this movie for multiple different reasons. One, me and my fiance, our first date was to see this first Shazam movie, so we always have that kind of nice little nostalgic bit to it. Second, I fucking love this movie. I love this movie for a lot of different reasons, pretty much because it actually made me feel the same feeling that I had when I went and saw the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, like just in awe of something so cool and seeing a character for the very first time on the screen that I had grown up reading in the comics, and Shazam was one of those characters for me, just as Spider-Man was as well. And there's just this magical feeling in this first movie. It's such a small-scale DC Universe film, and at the time of release for this was the smallest of all the DCEU efforts. It was a fun one at that. I love the connections, and as well, I love a lot of the Easter eggs in here, and I just love how Zachary Levi played this role. And speaking of Zachary Levi, that was another soft spot. I was such a massive fan of him in the original show Chuck. If you never saw that, it's on streaming on HBO Max right now. I highly recommend it. I love that show. If you're a geek, it's like right up your alley. But seeing that he got casted as Shazam was such a big, bold move, but it was one that I think paid off, and is a character that I think carries so much essence to the role. Zachary Levi brought a lot to that. This movie's fun. It's dark. It's kind of scary, and it feels like a superhero movie that would not have been made in this era of filmmaking, but it really was, and I think David F. Sandberg did a great job directing this movie. But now we get down to my number 5, and this movie actually made me like the rest of the films above this a little bit more, primarily 3 of them. But my number 5 is The Flash. I was very hesitant going into this movie. I was very nervous, I wasn't even getting that excited about this film, to be honest with you all. The reason for that being is just a lot of stuff going on with Ezra Miller. The studio this film felt like it was in development hell for like 9 years, and it just took forever for it to finally come out. The DC universe is restructuring, and we don't really know what James Gunn's going to be doing with a lot of these characters, even though we can assume that most of them will be gone. But then the trailer came out, and that is one of the best comic book trailers I've ever seen in my life, and that's actually arguably one of the best trailers I've ever seen. So then I got very excited. I hear a lot of good buzz about this. James Gunn saying this is one of the best comic book films of all time. I don't know if I'd go as far as say that, but this is certainly like top 25 best comic book films of all time. Like, it's very good. It's just not in the top 10. But this movie actually made me appreciate a lot of everything else that Zack Snyder had done. And I actually think that this is a love letter to not just DC itself, but to what Zack Snyder had accomplished in the DC universe. You know, Miller has been doing a lot of stuff, whether what side you are on it. I don't want to get too much into that, but I do think in this film, they're great. Michael Keaton's return as Batman is excellent and kicks so much ass. And Sasha Calle's Supergirl, it would be a dismay for James Gunn not to keep her for the Supergirl film that they are adapting right now, because she is badass in here. This is just a really enjoyable movie that what I've loved so much in this DC universe is that a lot of these films feel different than the last ones, but they all feel different because of the genres that they have. And in a way, this movie is very much a time travel film, kind of with the Back to the Future tone, but it feels like a what if Tim Burton had made a Flash movie in 1989. And that's kind of the film we get, whether it's to the brilliant, amazing score in this, the great cinematography, or even the feel and look of a lot of the action scenes and the story itself. It all feels whimsical and magical, and it brings me back to a period of time that I had not felt since, again, I had watched that very first Tim Burton Batman film, and that's saying a lot. Andy Muschietti did a great job adapting that and taking that style, but also making it into his own, and again, I am blown away by The Flash. I love this movie. I think it's incredible. I do think there's some issues with it. Some story issues, probably because of the reconstruction of the DC universe, as well as the visual effects are not good. Like, this is some of the worst visual effects I've ever seen in a movie. But it's a testament to say how great the performances are, how great the story is, to kind of forgive and forget a lot of those issues. And yeah, I can't wait to see this one again. Eagerly, the second it finished, chomping at the bits to go and see this film again, and I can't wait. Now, my number 4 is Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition. We do not talk about the original cut. That film should not even exist. That cut is awful. The Ultimate Edition, though, is peak. The reason that I say it's peak is because I actually think Zack Snyder's vision and what he wanted to do for this film finally came out. Not everyone will agree. There are a lot of people who hate this movie because of how they handle Superman and Batman in here, but I actually really like this darker tone, the ideology battle between a Ben Affleck Batman who's just absolutely come unrestrained, and very much inspired by The Dark Knight Returns, which is one of my personal favorite comic books of all time. Really love that Henry Cavill got a lot more to do in here as Superman, not in that original cut, but in the Ultimate Edition. They really flesh out both ideologies and make everyone's worth come together, why these two characters are at odds and why Lex Luthor is in between them all. And I think as a build-up movie to Zack Snyder's Justice League, this is a great one at that features amazing action scenes, a great dramatical avenue, and Ben Affleck's Batman still probably has the best action scene of any Batman. This one's tied with one of the ones in the Michael Keaton film, and I thoroughly loved it in here. That warehouse scene, man, it's so great. Batman v Superman only grows on me the more and more I think about it, the more and more I watch it, and I love the build up to it all. Specifically, a lot of the Nightmare Vision stuff that we get in this as well. That was pretty badass. Honestly, just a pretty massive fan of Zack Snyder and what he tried to do with this universe, and it worked for me, might not work for you. And now we get to my number 3, which is Zack Snyder's Justice League. I think this movie is a masterpiece, and if that says anything to you, that means the next 3 films, that means the next 2 films on this list are also masterpieces to me and perfect in every sort of way. Zack Snyder's Justice League is, for me, one of the best comic book films ever made. I wish I could see this thing in theaters. I think what Zack Snyder created here is the ultimate vision for a Justice League film. And in some way, shape, and form, I actually, blasphemy, I'm going to say something, I think this is better than Avengers Endgame and Avengers Infinity War. Was it a setup correctly? No, there could have been a couple more years and stuff, but what Snyder was able to do in here really just fit for me. I like the story. I like the dramatics. It has the big influence of being over 4 hours and getting all the development between characters, but it feels so epic in nature, and it disappoints me that we'll never get part 2. But I hope, and I've always been saying this, I hope that one day that they release a comic book that is the rest of Zack Snyder's vision for that, so at least the fans do have something to go to and actually revisit. They've done this for a couple other things, so why not do it for Zack Snyder's world? Zack Snyder's Justice League, I think when we look at this and remember it, it is the character building. It is the fact that every character got something to do in this version, and the fact that the heart of this story is Cyborg is such an important thing, and you get to see why Ray Fisher is an amazing actor. I loved him in this role, and then you get to see the return of Superman here. He is the soul of it all, and Henry embodies the Superman that many people have been wanting to see from him do, and it sucks again that we will never get to see that. I really hope that one day we get to see some other version of him as Superman. I doubt it, but that's just the optimistic in me talking. I love what they were able to do in here with them. Ben Affleck kind of growing up as this leader, and specifically seeing how that kind of dives into within The Flash and where his character's at in there. Wonder Woman, Aquaman, the list goes on and on for all the greatness that they have in this movie, and there is not one flaw for me personally in this film. I get into my number 2, which on this entire list, this is the most rewatchable DC film of all time. I will even say I would rather rewatch this more than the Dark Knight stuff. Not saying it's better than the Dark Knight. I just mean on a rewatch level, this film is so rewatchable. I saw this film 18 times in theaters, and that does not include how many times I've watched it on HBO Max when it premiered, and that is James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. This movie was everything that I wanted. I'm wearing my King Shark shirt right here, but I absolutely love this movie top to bottom. I have no issues with this. I jump back into it whenever I want. I laugh my ass off. I love the music. I love the action. And I primarily love the characters so much. Every character gets a moment to shine in here. And I love how it kind of comes down. And they actually do take the stakes of killing off people and building it up. You have Peacemaker, which I didn't even include the Peacemaker show on here, but this would be pretty high up here. I'd probably put it right underneath The Flash or a little bit after Shazam. Love that show. Love what James Gunn did with that show and built up that character, because I did not like Peacemaker in this movie just because he's kind of a dick. But I love Rick Flag. I love Idris Elba. He's so badass. King Shark, I mean, again, love the dude. Margot Robbie is excellent as Harley Quinn. It's just, this film just, it's so damn oozing with charm and everything that you would want from James Gunn. And while this is pure and pure out a James Gunn film, whether it comes down to the blood, the humor, it's just excellent. And has so many weird, wacky characters. I didn't even get to talk about Ratcatcher 2 or even Polka Dot Man. And the fact that you include both of those characters and make it emotional and caring and awesome at the same time and never feeling stupid. This, again, is just one of those movies that I could watch at any point in time and completely enjoy. The last time that a comic book movie had me feeling that way was probably Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse or the original Deadpool, because the original Deadpool is my most watched film in theaters of all time. My number one favorite DCEU film is Man of Steel. This is really much the only film for quite a while that felt just solo and singular to what it is. But the reason that I think Masterpiece of Steel is my favorite DCEU film is mostly because the Superman character I always liked growing up. I liked him. I was him, you know, dressed up for Halloween. I liked some of the comic books. I loved him in the Justice League Unlimited series, and I liked his animated show. But I was always more of a Batman guy. And I was always more of a weirdo guy like the Flash and Martian Manhunter and sometimes even the Green Lanterns or like the Suicide Squad. And this is the first Superman movie where I went, man, I love that character. And I think they turned a character who can be primarily looked at as a Boy Scout. I think they turned a character who looks a lot like a Boy Scout and acts like a Boy Scout in so many of the different interpretations in live action, and gave a little bit more grit to him, gave a little bit more depth to him, gave a story about a guy who just doesn't know where he belongs in this world. And I feel like none of the other Superman movies, and I know that might be blasphemy for people who love Christopher Reeves, who maybe even love the Brandon Routh version, I like those. This is my Superman. And whatever James Gunn has cooking up, I fingers off to you, man. I don't know how you're going to do it. I just know that Man of Steel was everything that I've ever wanted to see from a Superman movie, and it really works for me in all of those lights. I honestly think the third act of this film, while it is pretty much a destruction of Metropolis, it feels for all the stakes, and when he's taking out them by himself, whether it's Zod or any of the other Kryptonians, it is badass, and Henry Cavill is absolutely a monster in the role. Fits Clark Kent, he fits Superman, but he's still trying to find his place in this entire world, and I love this movie wholeheartedly. That's my DCEU updated ranking. Thanks so much, guys, for clicking on this. You guys are really all the best. Looking forward to what James Gunn has done next. We'll probably do one more of these by the end of this year when Aquaman is released. I don't know if I'm still going to do one for Blue Beetle. Maybe we'll do like a short one to just update it all. But of course, guys, until next time, stay classy.